Okay, we are back for the afternoon session. So my name is Gillian Wallace and I'm the Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture at the Melbourne School of Design. In this panel, the topic is the aesthetics of sustainability. And for those of you who are joining online, we have live captioning available for virtual and in-person audience. You'll see instructions and a QR code on the screen soon. And if you have any questions about the captioning, please visit the AV booth or send a message in chat. Now I'd like to introduce Jungyoon Kim, who will be running this panel. And of course, she is known to you all by now. She is the mastermind behind the exhibition and also the whole conference. So this is her panel. Now, she, of course, is the Associate Professor in Practice of Landscape Architecture at the GSD. She's a practicing landscape architect, and she founded Parkim with Myeong-Jun Park in Rotterdam, following their success in the Taiwan Chi Earthquake Memorial Design Competition. And in 2006, they relocated to Korea. Parkim has completed projects of diverse scales and nature, ranging from corporate landscapes to civic venues. Current projects include the Susong Lake floating stage, which is in the exhibition. And they have won many, and that was from an international invited design competition in 2024, and that is scheduled to be completed in 2026. I'd like us to welcome Jungyoon.
Good afternoon. Now that sustainability has become a baseline expectation for landscape architects, we must also ask what kind of experience and aesthetic cultures we are offering to society as a cultural agency. To frame this question, I'd like to read a paragraph from essay, verbatim, by Professor Jung-Han Bae of Seoul National University, who is a leading theorist and critic of Korean landscape architecture, written for Parkim's forthcoming monograph, which will be marketed next month, hopefully, Alternative Nature. In it, he describes how Parkim's design language has evolved from a framework grounded primarily in performance to one that foregrounds the appearance of performance. Quote, Elizabeth K. Meyer has identified invisibility as one of the persistent challenges in landscape architecture since the era of McCarthyan ecological planning. Similarly, Peter Walker has underscored the absence of the visible landscape as a symptom of broader limitations in contemporary design thinking. The tendency to marginalize form has left designers unsure how to articulate it, and in its absence, landscapes lose their legibility. When a landscape architect fails to make form visible, they often default to the pastoral picturesque, relying on vague naturalistic gestures, or reverting to the ornamental planting schemes favored by general taste. Yet the task of shaping landscape from form remains essential, distinct from outdated decorative impulses or formalism for its own sake, quote end. So in the era of climate change, there is a real risk that the virtues of the permeable surface and the urban canopy may eclipse our understanding of landscape architecture as a cultural agency. As Professor Bae continues, quote, if landscape making is a cultural act, then the landscape itself, as its result, must be experienced and understood as form. With this in mind, we now turn to two very different designers of mountain and water, and one scholar, to ponder together the aesthetics of sustainability. First, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Myeong-Jun Lee, who has written extensively on landscape-related visual culture and shifting ecological design thinking in Korean urban parks. Myeong-Jun is Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture at Hanggang National University in Korea and holds a PhD from Seoul National University, where he examined how Western modes of representing landscape were introduced to Korea in the early 20th century. His recently published articles on constructing Korean identity and the trends and issues of garden making commissioned by municipalities of Korea. He is also author of Representing Landscape Architecture, published by Handoff 2021, a monograph in Korean on the history of design drawing. I think this was also translated into Chinese, right? After we hear from Myeong-Jun, I am very much looking forward to hearing how our speakers understand the aesthetics of their respective mountain and water across subtropical, tropical, and temperate climate, the landscapes rooted in regions whose traditional ideas of nature and nature-related ways of life have been markedly different. Chisa Toda of Studio on Site will present work from PA47, the Japanese forest island, a largely temperate region with 4 distinct seasons. With more than 30 years of practice, she has contributed to projects ranging from intimate urban parks to large-scale regional restorations, including award-winning works such as Shinagawa Central Garden, the Nagano Prefecture Art Museum, Tama Newtown Regeneration, and YKK Kurobe Center Park. Her practice addresses the challenges of global climate change while revitalizing local ecologies, seeking to express the aesthetics of nature by drawing out the specific character of each site. Chisa has taught at Tama Art University, Keio University, and Kanto Gakuin University, and she's also a proud alum of MLA. Yuhan Go is the director of design at Salad Dressing. I know you all love the name, Salad Dressing. I know all of you must love the name, right? Where she has been since its inception. Her works primarily located in IM13, that is South China subtropical evergreen and monsoon forest, and in IM18, Peninsula Malaysian and Sumatran tropical rainforest. She is a Malaysian-born landscape architect with a background in the arts. Her design philosophy is shaped by a deep engagement with art history and Eastern literature. To begin this amazing session, please welcome Professor Myeong-Jun Lee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Myeong-Jun Lee. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I'm currently teaching the theory and history of landscape architecture at Hanguk National University in Korea. Today, I'd like to discuss the aesthetics and practices of mountain and water in Korean landscape architecture. As many of you know, mountain and water, or sansu, is a philosophical and cultural concept in East Asia that shapes how people perceive and experience nature and how natural environments are designed. In this sense, sansu can be discussed in relation to the Western notion of the landscape. Both concepts, sansu and landscape, developed in relation to visual culture, particularly landscape painting. For example, this sansu painting represents Mount Geumgang, one of Korea's most celebrated mountains, painted by the Korean painter Jungyoon in the early 18th century. This painting, on the other hand, is by the French painter Claude Lorraine, titled Landscape with Aeneas at Delos, from the ancient Roman epic, the Aeneid, painted in the late 17th century. Both sansu and landscape are related to the pictorial tradition of depicting landscape, but they reflect fundamentally different ways of perceiving nature. In Jungyoon's work, human figures are very visible and rendered on a very small scale compared to the surrounding mountains. Here, nature seems to embrace the human figures so that humans and nature are not separated, but integrated as one harmonious whole. In contrast, Claude Lorrain's painting clearly separates human figures from nature. In the foreground, we see human figures pointing toward the middle and far distance of the landscape. This composition embodied the Western way of seeing nature, where the landscape become an object of visual contemplation, and human subject observe it from a distance. In other words, Western landscape is understood as an object of visual contemplation, while Eastern sansu is experienced through multiple senses, engaging body and mind. This distinction can also be observed in designed gardens such as Sosaewon and Starwood. The traditional Korean understanding of nature began to change as the Western concept of landscape and its visual ways of seeing was introduced to Korea. I have previously published a small study which examined how the Western landscape concept was introduced to Korea in the early 20th century through the emerging culture of photography. The research began with this single postcard. The composition has a photo montage-like quality. This picture postcard depicts Tapgol Park, one of the earliest examples of a Western-style urban parks introduced to Korea. In the composition, the figure in the foreground is clearly detached from the middle and background scenery, showing a visual separation between the human subject and the surrounding landscape. This postcard depicts Namsan Park on Mount Namsan in Seoul, another well-known urban park in the early 20th century. Here again, the figure in the foreground is shown contemplating the distant scenery. Such a composition reflects not the traditional Korean understanding of sansu, but rather the Western conception of landscape as an object of visual contemplation. This new visual paradigm profoundly shaped the modern perception of nature in Korea. Distinct from other East Asian capitals such as Tokyo and Beijing, both mostly situated on vast plains, but Seoul's urban core is surrounded by mountainous terrain. This painting depicts the royal palaces of the Changdeok-gung and Changgyeong-gung, where the buildings are placed naturally on a hilly landscape. The slopes and green spaces blend into the palace grounds. In my view, this image captures the essence of how mountains and water were traditionally understood and incorporated into urban design in Korea. In recent decades, landscape architects have reinterpreted sansu as an ecological condition that designers actively engaged with, particularly in relation to sustainability. In the 1990s, Korean landscape architects began to develop landscape design strategies using ecology in response to growing concern for sustainability. Designers focused on representing ecology through the construction of wildlife habitats. For example, Saekgang Ecological Park was designed following a nature-centered ecological approach, attempting to restore the untouched or original state of nature. As a result, Seoul's ecological park of the time represent wildlife habitats with limited and separated human activities, showing a binary dualism between nature and humans. By the early 2000s, ecological design in Korea began to move beyond the representation of nature toward a more artistic and experiential reinterpretation of ecological processes. Seonyu-do Park in Seoul shows this shift, embracing the site's former water purification plant and industrial history as part of new ecological aesthetics. Here, ecology is experienced as a process shaped by nature, infrastructure, and time. Since the 2010, ecological design in Korea has evolved toward a more resilient and adaptive approach, integrating ecological performance with urban system and climate adaptability. This tendency emphasized ecology as infrastructure, a performative medium, addressing environmental and ecological challenges. For example, mud infrastructure constructed along the Yanghwa section of the Han River translate the idea of resilience into topographic design, where topographic forms respond to seasonal flooding and sedimentation cycles of the Han River. In addition, mud infrastructure reinterpret the aesthetics of Jungyoon's traditional sansu painting in a contemporary way and reimagine the former Han River riverbank before modern urban development. Another case, Thermal City, proposed for the Dangin-Lee heat plant site incorporated curved heated seating powered by waste hot water using the thermal comfort simulation to regulate microclimate and integrate human experience with energy ecology. In the late 2010, ecology expanded beyond environmental performance toward a metaphorical understanding as designers reinterpreted traditional sansu culture by connecting ecological thinking with historical and aesthetic narratives. An important example is Gwanghwamun Square renovation project in Seoul. Located in front of Gyeongbokgung Palace, the main royal palace of the Joseon dynasty, the square has long served as a symbolic urban spaces in the heart of the capital. As shown, the Kim Jong-un's map of the Hanyang, the design restored the historical visual axis from Bugak Mountain, Mount Bugak, through Gyeongbokgung Palace, and this is the site of what is now Gwanghwamun Square. Next is that visually experienced in An Jung-sik's painting of the same view. Here you can see the aesthetic of historical landscape. Ecology functions as a metaphorical medium, reconfiguring public spaces as a collective ground for urban memory, civic engagement, and cultural narratives. So far, we have seen how landscape has been perceived and designed through different media, such as painting, photography, and ecological design practices. Today, a new medium shaping landscape representation is image generative AI. AI drawing are produced through predictive processes based on accumulated imagery or data from the past. This process enabled new aesthetic experimentation beyond conventional pastoral or picturesque ideals. AI imagery can stimulate new design ideas, much like how designers have historically drawn inspiration from sansu painting. At the same time, however, repeated learning from existing landscape imagery raise concern that AI generative imagery may eventually reproduce conventional landscape aesthetics in visually familiar forms. Therefore, AI should not be understood simply as an image generative tool, but as a creative medium for imagining uncertain ecological futures and exploring new landscape design strategies. Thank you very much for your attention. That concludes my presentation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Jungyoon, for inviting me to be here. Jungyoon once asked me an interesting question. Is it a blessing or a curse to be a landscape architect in the tropics? Well, in the tropics, growth is excessive, plants are unruly. If land is left unattended, it is quickly reclaimed. Diversity is overwhelming. On the 164 hectares Bukit Timah Hill in Singapore alone, there are more plant species than in the whole of North America. I'm a third generation of Chinese born in Malaysia, in a town called Kluang, a basin surrounded by mountains and rivers. My childhood's landscape was not picturesque in the classical sense, but alive. Unlike traditional Chinese shanshui, where mountain and water are often viewed from a distance, I became fascinated by what happens within mountains and water. The dense, intimate symbiosis relationships that hold living systems together. Today, I will speak about my physical encounters with life in the rainforest, how these experiences shifted my understanding of human-centric aesthetics, and how through being rewilded by the multi-species life, they led me to sense, however imperfectly, the unwealth of other beings. About 15 years ago, we began to explore the rainforest of Borneo. The first few visits were unbearable, with leeches chasing us, screeching sounds among the dense foliage that we can't even see through the 5 meter. But after years of studies and encounters, we began to form relationship with the life of the rainforest. Now, even when swallowed by humidity, there is still an urge calling us back to the rainforest, to search the resonance with the beings we encounter. One of my favorite examples is Nepenthes, a pitcher plant once believed to eat small rodents. It turns out it has evolved into something far stranger, a toilet bowl. Its nectar on the cap is actually laxative. The droppings of visiting rodents become its primary nutrients. Survival here is not dominance. It is negotiations among species. In 1845, Alexander von Humboldt described nature as a web of life, Earth as a living organism, interconnected from the tiniest insects to the tallest tree. This is not far from the Buddhist Sutra of Indranet, where one diamond shines, all others sparkle simultaneously. A group of artists whose work resonates deeply with this way of thinking is often associated with relational aesthetic. Their works are not conceived as static objects, but as a living system shaped by rhythms, feedback loops, and non-human agencies. In most of these works, visitors do not merely consume the artwork, they enter into it, influence it, and are themselves transformed through the encounter. What interests me is not relational aesthetic as a social format, but its ecological potential, where agency is distributed across humans, non-humans, and the temporal forces. From here, aesthetics alone no longer satisfy us. The beauty of the rainforest is not form. It lies in plenitude, in a complex relationship between lives. 80% of rainforest life live in the canopy, about 40 to 60 meters above the ground. We wanted to experience this rarely explored canopy ourselves, so we built a treetop cinema. 26 meters above the forest floor, we screen the films in the evening. During the day, visitors on the platform were immersed in rich vertical biodiversity. At night, lanterns attracted swarms of nocturnal insects. In the tropics, up to 1,500 insect species can inhabit in a single tree. One day after heavy rains, several workers developed serious rashes. They told us we had offended the forest spirits. As it turned out, the spirits had a Latin name. Our tower stood next to Guta rengas, one of the most toxic trees in the rainforest. When its branches break, toxins travel through moisture in the air. Sometimes what we call a ghost in the forest is simply chemistry, a cloud of defensive compounds released by plants as a communication. The forest had responded to us, and we were humbled by how much the slower, deeply interconnected life of plants still have to rewild us when we are back to the city. The term rewilding may be familiar to many of you. British writer George Monbiot defines in two ways. The first is ecological, restoring ecosystems, reactivating and recreating the lost relationships. The second is ethical, rewilding our own lives, in other words, rewilding our mind, learning to live alongside other beings, and dissolving entrenched hierarchies in our bioethics. Over the years, salad dressing has been reflecting on rewilding beyond ecology. The Vitruvian man is displaced by a Paralympic athlete with prosthetics who runs faster than an Olympic athlete. Rewilding also forces us to confront inequalities of nationalities, race, gender, class, and access. At Enabling Village in Singapore, the country's first inclusive community space for persons with disabilities, we designed a garden that embodies the diversity. 80% of the planting here is native, and a self-cleansing pond runs through the sites. Plants will mature, adapt, and are replaced over time. It is a cycle that should require minimum human intervention to sustain. It is an ongoing experiment, allowing us to introduce new ecological elements. Rewilding water here includes reintroducing native fish and aquatic plants. The water is never crystal clear here, yet it contains lots of microbes that are essential for plants, like a yogurt. Surprisingly, the acceptance of the look is quite high. What disturbed the system was not ecology, but belief. People releasing invasive fish for good karma. Native lodgers, bobs, and even the strong survivor snakehead fish struggle to compete with the aliens of the African chilids. We return repeatedly to educate visitors. Sometimes authors came into killing missions of these invasive species. We saw an opportunity to rewild the concrete city and also to rewild our acceptance of the undomesticated. It is a process of change in the human's heart, to rediscover our attachment to the wild by bringing the symbiosis closer into our neighborhood. Singapore City in Nature visions reflect this shift. The return of authors and home-built signals ecological recovery, but it also raises new questions of coexistence. As urban spaces tighten, we must decide how to share space. Some zones may exclude humans, some may exclude other beings, and some must allow intermingling. These spaces should exist in equal status. To us, rewilding lives in that middle ground, where new complex relationships and new collisions emerge. In a 56 acres botanic park project in Malaysia, we tested this directly. There are areas for community sports and activity. There are restoration zones cordoned off for ecological succession, and there are in-between spaces where encounter happened. These are not always comfortable spaces in humans' sense. Mud is a skincare for animal. Salt lakes are mineral bar, and hollows are their homes. What we call unpleasant necessities are the places where animals' life becomes legible. We design these encounters not to be avoided, but to be experienced cathartically. But the design is ongoing, so I hope I can show to you guys next time. What we wish for is people might step briefly outside of their neural preferences and begin to sense other ways of being. As Donna Haraway reminds us that we have never been humans alone. To coexist, we must learn how other beings perceive the world. And that brings us to Umwelt. Jacob von Uxkol described Umwelt as a sensory bubble through which each organism experiences reality. As Malaysian-born ecologist Ed Yong writes, Earth teems with sights and textures, sounds and vibrations, smells and tastes, electric and magnetic fields, but every organism perceives only a tiny slice of this immense world. Technology is beginning to dissolve the boundaries. What interests me is not the novelty of these images, but what they imply, that our environments are already alive with presence that we have been blind to. These technologies were originally developed for surveillance and warfare, but today they offer another possibilities for us to sense how other beings experience space, time, and proximity. This is not about replacing humans' perception. This is about decentralizing it. As Hiroshi Tsukimoto, a contemporary Japanese artist, writes, these machines are a new mirror to fulfill our desire to know our mythology of humanity. I think of three lights as our tools in our human history: fire, light bulb, and the invisible light. The first light is fire. Since Prometheus, fire has enabled ceramics, metal, steam to nuclear industries. It underpins modern civilization. But it also fans out our connections with nature. There are also rare moments when fire reconnected us. George Shiras, the grandfather of flash photography, using the technique of hunting with jet lightings to encounter animals eye to eye, changing the perception of one looking into the nature in the dark. The second light is the light bulb. Its invention transformed the night into productive time. Now, we can live our life to the fullest with the eternal sun which overrides our chronobiology. This insatiable society has further distanced us from the nature. The third light lies beyond our human visions, the invisible lights. Through senses, machines, and AI, we begin to glimpse other Umwelts, not as metaphors, but as measurable realities. On the treetop of the Botanic Park in Malaysia, we propose a moon, or a biosphere, generated through signals gathered by sensors dispersed across the landscape. These sensors register invisible light, inaudible sounds to humans, vibrations, electromagnetic fields, translating conditions sensed by other beings into a shifting presence. The result form is atmospheres, closest to a living archive than a designed object, recalling a natural history museum, yet without taxonomy or hierarchy. Here, data is not rendered as analytic mapping, but fictionalized into evolving entities. The biosphere grows, mutates, and ages alongside the forest. Machines do not merely represent life. that participate in it, become part of an ecology and that exists humans' perceptions. The first two lights drew a line between humans and nature. The third light has the potential to reconnect us by learning to share perception. This idea came together most clearly to us in Singapore Pavilion at Expo 2021. We did not imagine the pavilion as an object, but as a superorganism, a system shared by humans, plants, machines, and data. We designed robots as an ambassador of plants to voice out their mixed emotions. It was born as an infant. Its intelligence grew alongside its guardians and the surrounding plant's life. Could a robot feel love? What does it mean to be intelligent? We are only just becoming aware of other intelligence that have been with us all along. If Anthropocene aesthetic made humans' impact visible, then a post-Anthropocene aesthetic shift attention to how life continues, adapts, and co-orders space beyond human intention. As Tim Flannery, an Australian paleontologist, elaborates the term evolutions, in Chinese word 天眼, sky performance, the evolution is sort of a performance, one whose theme is the electrochemical process we call life, and whose stage is the entire Earth under the energy of the sun. With the stage set, our pavilion transformed itself into 3 digital diorama and a game, which their memories are expanding with information captured from the pavilions during the event. This happens inside a half-open cone and gave a beautiful sectioner's quality that seems to reveal the pavilion's memory of digital data storage. We see this as a neuro-connective expression of the pavilions, moving beyond the 70s high-tech architecture style of truthfully exposing the functional mechanical system, which Archigram coined as Baoism. We imagine a future where humans, other living beings, and digital beings do not merely coexist, but learn to evolve together. In our dream projects, Tall Lines, of course inspired by Highlight, we envision an unoccupied tower becoming a vertical nature reserve, not designed to be efficient, but to be inhabited by time, growth, and uncertainty. By experimenting with technologies like interspecies money, we ask what it might mean for nature to hold agency and for value to be measured beyond human preference. Mountain and water are not scenery. They are forces shaping life over deep time. Time is not linear. It is cyclical, recursive, and alive. What we call sustainability is not an aesthetic outcome. It is a condition of relationship. Perhaps the task ahead is not to design better solutions, but to learn how to become a different kind of human. And so, are we evolving together? Thank you. So, let's welcome Chisa-san.
Thank you, Jungyoon, and thank you, Yuha. It's a great honor to be here, like after 30 years graduating from GSD. Oh, I never thought of him coming back here. Like, okay, really? No. Okay. Today I'll frame sustainability not as a technological solution, but as an aesthetic condition emerging from ecological performance using landform as primary infrastructure. This image of Yosemite illustrates a fundamental principle. Valleys, terraces, and gentle slopes retain water and vegetation. Steep slopes do not. Water accumulates only where form allows it to stay. From this condition, vegetation, soil, and ecosystems emerge. Form is not a container of ecology. It is its generator. When landform sustains ecological processes, beauty appears as an outcome. I will introduce 3 projects from my firm, YKK Center Park, Oktama Forest Therapy Trail, and Goda Kadam, which has same concept but like different strategy. YKK Group is a global manufacturing company best known for its fastening products and architectural products. We have worked on this site for over 25 years, allowing us to observe ecological succession over time. The site sits on the alluvial fan of the Kurobe River, gently slopes toward the Sea of Japan. Dig 1 meter and groundwater appears. In the 1970s, the site was closed industrial landscape. From the 1990s, factory reduction enabled its transformation into a productive forest landscape. The area we call the symbolic zone includes Center Park as its core. Our key idea was simple. The landscape should not be completed at construction, but mature through time. We designed with a 30-year growth horizon. Treating forest development as a design material, sections were used to visual temporal change, not final form. The lawn plaza is graded at 3%. Here, grading is not technical. It is spatial structure. Circular mounds around existing trees allow rainwater to penetrate and remain near root zones. It's not going. At this scale, slopes become terraced landform. Square mounds under ginkgo trees improve drainage and aeration. These forms were not sculptural gesture. They result directly from hydrological soil performance. Yet they produce a clear visual order revealed most clearly by snow. Behind the round roof exhibition hall, we created an experimental forest. Most planting bases are linear, like agriculture. Here we introduce circular mounds as a hypothesis. Given the site's groundwater conditions, we integrated waterside woodland. How does geometry affect growth and biodiversity? The soil is gravelly and sandy, far from ideal. Slopes were stabilized with turf. Seedlings were planted. You can see small seedlings. After 15 years, the forest matured. Aquatic plants were never planted. All wetland and water edges species established naturally, carried by wind and birds. For over 20 years, YKK has continuously monitored species presence. Several species classified as rare in Toyama Prefecture have appeared. This shows that when landform and water are properly designed, ecosystem self-organizes. The site also changed socially. Factory gates were removed. The landscape became public. What was once a closed industrial ground is now part of the city's everyday landscape. Sustainability here is not only ecological, but also social and cultural. Sustainability becomes aesthetic when landform operates as ecological infrastructure. By designing ground, water, and time, landscape becomes adaptive system, not fixed image. Next, the Oktama Forest Therapy Trail, where ecological urbanism meets well-being. The site is located at the western edge of Tokyo in Oktama Town, a threshold between metropolitan life and forest. The project is grounded experiment in forest therapy, and it translates shinrin-yoku, or forest basing, a cultural practice into spatial system, where human health and forest health are sustained together. The trail follows existing ridge and valley topography. Movement, perception, and rhythm are organized by slope and drainage, not design and position. The site is extremely steep. Without retaining walls, even forest management paths were impossible. Forest consists of sugi and hinoki artificial plantation, largely unmanaged. Rather than restoring an assumed ideal, the project works with existing conditions to reactivate human engagement. Timber logs from the site act as seedings and retaining walls. They are structure, furniture, and forest management tools simultaneously. Platform encourage slow movement and pause. They frame sounds, scent, light, and distance, prioritizing sensory immersion over spectacle. Concrete foundations were impossible. Steel pin foundation allow minimal disturbance and reversibility. 3 stations provide rest and basic health checks. Well-being is treated as spatial process, not a separate program. No trees were planted in this project. Annual maintenance supports timber structures and ongoing forest management economics. The final project is Gorakudan Fuji, a Japanese-style resort hotel at Mount Fuji's foothills, opened last summer. Actually, this is the first time I'm presenting this project at public. We don't even have it on our homepage, so it's pretty new. The site lies west of Tokyo at Mount Fuji's foothills. Topography clearly expresses its volcanic origin. The site sits in a valley between steep slopes from the Tanzara Range and Fuji's gentle terrain. Springs and streams emerge naturally. The contrast between deciduous and evergreen forest is most visible in winter. This guiding the planting and spatial strategy. At the center, between the main building and onsen hot spring building, lies Momiji-dani, the Maple Valley. Maple Valley is the spatial heart of the project. It mediates architecture, water, and slope, transforming residual valley into a performative landscape. This section shows the relationship between buildings and valley topography. The valley functions as both ecological corridor and experimental core. A shallow reflecting pond at Notemburo, the outdoor hot spring, captures Mount Fuji, merging distant landform and bodily experience. Traditional gardens were executed by stone specialists. Gardens and geological landscapes coexist coexist through collaborative craftsmanship. Large stones were available on site. Those were excavated decades ago from Hakone and stored here. Using these stones, Reed connected the project to regional geological processes. Stone placement avoids stylistic reproduction. The goal is geological continuity. The scenery of Mount Fuji and Maple Valley is fleeting. Seasons and weather constantly reshape the experience. Across these projects, sustainability emerges not from added system, but from precise work with landform, water, and time. This is sustainability as spatial performance, not visual experience. When landform is allowed to perform ecologically, aesthetic quietly emerges over time. Thank you. So I should call everybody here, right?
It was wonderful, really. I mean, so I had this privilege of inviting all the speakers to my seminar last fall semester. So I was able to really listen to what they're planning to say in the symposium, but obviously they reshaped and refurbished their talk more again and again. So and also perfectly 15 minutes, all of you, and 12 minutes even for the panel one. So I really appreciate, I mean, I know all of you are super busy. My question, I'm gonna just make it really brief so that we can open up to audience more. We actually have Esther Kim on podium, who is MLA 1 and MArch 1 AP 25, now working in New York KPF office. I invite her to the podium to help Professor Myeong-Jun Lee to answer. I know his English is already good enough, but to be more actively engaged in this discussion, I think it's really great that Esther agreed to help Myeong-Jun the real-time translation. So thank you. So I kind of intentionally, deliberately pair you two, Chisa and Yuhan, because such a drastically different climate you're working with, right? I'm kind of familiar with PA 47 because we're close to PA 48, where we have temperate climate, and also we have, I mean, you have volcanic geology, we have granite geology, but how can I say? We have some scarcity and abundance, but we can balance in a way that is manageable. In a way, again, as a landscape architect, we always have to provide landscape that is performing from the very beginning. That means we don't really have enough time to wait until a tree to mature, right? We usually need to wait until like 5 or 10 years for the tree to grow. Whereas Yuhan's practice is anything just you throw a seed and then you grow, right? Am I exaggerating? So that's why I ask you the question, to be a landscape architect in a tropical climate, is it a blessing or a curse? It seems like a blessing for you, right? So my question is, first of all, the role of geology. I mean, the geometry, sorry. Role of geometry. So because of that constraint of the 4 seasons, and we have winter to bear with, and we have summer, a lot of rain and humidity. In terms of PA 47 and 48, I think the form of the role of land, the land forming, for example, is a generator of the aesthetics and also sustainability. So it's kind of legible form of the performance, right? And then at the same time, that's something that guiding structure of the ecology or of the beauty to come in time. So I think it was really clear for me And I wonder if you want to add anything in terms of role of geometry in your design. So that's for you. Johan, so in a very different way, I can see you have just somehow you also like to control aesthetics of the jungle, the tropical forest, but then in a way, very different way from either by designing geometry or trying to design landform, but in a way that you really want to establish the relationship between the elements that are already flourishing in tropical without any of your aid, right? But then I actually want you to elaborate further the role of the machine. So what's the role of the machine that you propose in terms of that? So in terms of making the intermingled space, right? Intermingled space between the human and nature. What's the role of the machine in this sense? So maybe I can, and to Myeong-Jun, I really was fascinated by your talk in terms of how you explained the photogenic landscape, starting from the colonial era of the postcard making culture, and then how the Western culture kind of influenced how human being detached from such a landscape, and then the future of the representation, which is AI. And then it was really amazing to see the AI generated image that you created. But then I was able to see how the landscape becoming so prototype landscape after some steps of the learning, because AI only can do from what we input, right? So I wonder if you can elaborate a little further in terms of the pedagogy of education, because in the GSD, we discuss a lot can we even control the use of AI? And in what level, either as a design tool or as a representational outcome, wonder if you have any idea in terms of the pedagogy, how do we perceive the future of the AI and design education? Okay, so Johan, maybe.
Yes, so I think quite this question of machines, because was quite often being asked to us, and so to us we see machine can help us to reconnect to nature, because there are so many things that already surround us, but then we can't see. So, for example, birds see infrared, birds see UV light. Birds see UV, and reptiles sense temperatures. And then, for example, the simplest example is dogs that actually map out the space through their nose. It's something that warping our perceptions and senses. So in the last century, we all designed to based on our big five senses, our taste, eyes, and especially. But then today, with machines, it can help us to see time, space, and scale very differently. And our design should also include all the living beings around us. So to understand them, through machine to understand them, that can help us to design better. And of course, to reconnect the relationship.
So, is my understanding right if I say that machine can help Myeong-Jun to develop his pedagogy in terms of AI machine learning? Do you think so?
I think so. I think machine is evolving. And there are a lot of fears of machines, a lot of fear of AI today. A lot of people is scared of losing job. But then I don't see that. I see that there is a chance that we can co-evolve together. How solution, I don't know, but that is what we see. Yeah.
Because I can actually think of the photo montage that Myeong-Jun showed for the Pagoda Park, right? It was only like 4 or 5 patches of the cut photo that they use to make that such image, right? But then now, the era of AI, we have just so much material that we can use. Then maybe in that sense, what you're saying in terms of using the machine to create like something enough to make the AI resource more powerful. So maybe this is a good time for Myeong-Jun to answer.
AI에 대해서 말을 하기 전에 조경의 그런 어떤 미디엄의 역사에 대해서 좀 얘기하고 싶습니다.
We're talking about AI. We want to talk about the history of the landscape.
사실 우리가 어떤 기술이 처음 나타났을 때는 그것들을 보는 여러 가지 시각들이 이제 존재를 하게 됩니다.
When technology appears, there's a lot of different ways of looking at the technology.
네. 예를 들면 1900년대 이제 중반 이후에, 그러니까 후반에 CAD나 포토샵이 조경 디자인에 등장했을 때도 조경가들은 크게 이제 2가지의 관점에서 그러한 테크놀로지에 대해서 이야기를 했습니다.
So when actually Photoshop and CAD appear in the design field in late 20th century, the landscape architects were actually discussing actively about the use of those technology.
첫 번째는 그러한 테크놀로지를 도구적으로 사용을 하고 그렇기 때문에 그것이 이제 디자인의 툴로서 좀 부적합하다라고 비판을 하는 사람들이 있었고, 그리고 다른 하나는 그럼에도 불구하고 그러한 테크놀로지가 조경 디자인에서 어떻게 창의적인 매체로 활용될 수 있을까에 대해서 주장을 하는 그런 사람들의 의견을 대립한 흔적이 그 역사 사료를 보면 나타납니다.
If you're actually looking at the historical document, some people argue that the use of those documentation tool actually pervades like the advancement of creative thinking, but other people really argue that there is a methodology for creative thinking.
그러한 점에서 AI가 이제 우리의 그 조경 디자인에 들어온 것도 사실 크게 다른 맥락인 것 같지는 않습니다. 비슷한 맥락입니다.
So I look at the same way that the way the AI come into the discipline here is nothing different from AutoCAD or other design tool that was entering into history.
왜냐하면 이미 사실 우리가 AI는 너무나 깊숙이 우리의 일상과 디자인에 들어와 있다라고 저는 생각을 합니다.
Already actually came in deeply into our everyday life, the AI.
그래서 우리가 그런 AI에 대해서 생각을 할 때 그것들이 비판적으로 좀 부정적으로 보지 않고 어떻게 그것들을 활용을 해서 우리가 디자인 띵킹에서 창의적인 매체로 활용이 될 수 있을까에 대해서 생각해 보는 것이 좋은 방향이라고 생각합니다.
So I think it is good way to think about the AI is not as a kind of preventative or negative critical thinking critically about the tool AI. I think this is rather a design tool that we can kind of collaborate with.
그러한 점에서 교육에서 특히 그러한 AI 리터러시, AI를 어떻게 활용할 것인가에 대해서 교육을 하는 것이 굉장히 중요하다고
So
생각합니다.
I believe that it is very important to teach the literacy in designing and utilizing AI, how the school has to be actively involved in teaching those literacy.
네, 이상.
That's it.
Okay. About geometry. About geometry. Okay. Since actually we're 4 partners in our firm. Like we 3 graduated landscape from U.S. and went back and made the firm. And like first when we began the firm, we were told too geometric in Japan. To be honest, it was really, yeah. And like in Japanese, zoen education, like somebody was, Gary was saying, they do more free lines, I should say. But for us, that's the composed of geometry, right? So it's that means like you're like making geometry unclear in some way, a free line. So to be responsible to what you're doing to the earth, I think we should be clear enough what kind of form that we put into, because since we are we're doing artificial thing, and like I showed in my image, I was putting like circular mound. It got really free formed, because the ecology does it, not us. So if we do like a free form, that makes it really vague, and like I think it's not good. What we have to be really responsible what we're doing as a landscape architect. Landscape architect is not a gardener or like planter or anything. It's architect in some way. We deal with land, but it's architect. So I think we really should know what we're doing in precise way and form.
So let me just help you a little bit here, because to save you from any future possible debate. Well, I think I totally agree with what you're saying. I also believe that the free-form landscape architect know what they're doing. But I think what you're saying is very similar to how I think. Just accept the fact that we are making artifact, right? Mm-hmm. So we create geometry first, like a landform first, but then let nature intervene. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then it will create your own emergent phenomena or ecology. But then, as a person who are in charge of shaping the land, we somehow need to make a drainage, and then the management plan for that is clear. And more manageable if we have clear geometry. I think that's how we kind of want to agree upon.
Right, and also like I think scale issue and thing.
Yes.
But like we're like designing by like the metrics in Japan, but like you don't have you have to know what scale are you dealing with. So like if you make it really free, you really get lost with what kind of like size is it going to be, right? Like, so in that meaning, I think we should be really too.
So I think that's why I also really emphasize the importance of line drawings also in my studio education as well, especially for the beginners. I mean, for the mature designers, of course, if they draw a free line, it must be composed with like 50, 100 arc, right? To realize such freeform. But for the beginners, mm-hmm. It's actually better to start with the precision, right? Right. In many sense, I agree. I think we can open up the question to the audience, because we are running out of time for the the two panels in the morning.
Hi, thank you all for your presentations. I'm just maybe a simple question. In the title of this panel is the aesthetics of sustainability, and I'm wondering for each of you, what does sustainability mean? What are you thinking about when you're talking about that?
Hello. I think sustainability is about life. Is about relationship, about how what we do together with the whole earth. Be it all the specialists has their own kind of work to do with sustainability. Like engineer has their own thing for landscape, we also have our own work that have to do with sustainability. So I think for me, I see sustainability more as a life form.
Okay. For me, sustainability is education, I guess. If what we do as landscape architect, if like some known landscape architect or no architect people see, like I want everybody to know how the earth is going on, keep going, learn from earth, everything. So that's like it's about education, I guess. Not only like school education, it's like kids education. Thank you.
저에게 있어서 서스테이너빌리티는 조경에서 그 서스테이너빌리티한 그런 에스테틱스 이런 것들이 중요하다고 생각을 합니다.
Sustainability, to me, I think deeply about the aesthetics in landscape.
보통 서스테이너빌리티라고 하면 우리가 생태적으로 건강하고 혹은 경제적으로 번영하는 그런 것들로만 생각을 하는데 사실은 서스테이너빌리티한 그런 어떤 미학이라는 것도 있을 수 있다라고 저는 생각을 하면서 리서치를 하고 있습니다.
So when I conduct my research, people always interpret sustainability as the economical efficiency or very biologically prosperous nature. But when I do my research, I think about the aesthetics also.
제가 아까 발표에서 이야기를 했듯이 그런 양화 한강공원 같은 그런 경우가 그런 서스테이너블리티한 서스테이너블 에스테틱스를 대표한다라고 볼 수 있습니다.
So in my earlier talk presentation today, I believe that one of the projects that I presented, which is Yangha Mud River Riverfront, is representative of those project that combines aesthetic and biology, sustainability together.
그래서 생태적으로도 기능을 하고 생물 소생권을 만들어갈 수도 있고 그럼으로써 또 정선의 페인팅 그 회화를 통해서 그런 도시화 이전의 그런 어떤 그 트래디셔널한 그런 에스테틱스를 동시에 구현을 하고 있다는 점에서 굉장히 중요한 작품이다라고 생각합니다.
So I think it's a key kind of project in terms of it's ecologically functioning, but actually brings back one of the old traditional Jungsong's painting and that aesthetic into the urban city.
네.
Wanted to add, this is not preset. So thank you very much, Myeong-Jun. Daniel.
Thank you so much for a beautiful panel. Maybe this question is maybe geared towards Yuhan and Myeong-Jun, and to put this panel in conversation with the earlier panel right before lunch, where we had the two authors who of the Big Asian Landscape Architecture book were a little bit dissatisfied by how the book was inadequate to represent all of the experiential, the haptic experiences of these landscapes, and thus the need to create the video, right? And so as part of both of your research methods and methods of making, it actually seems like image making is really important to both of your methods, whether it's through experimentation with DALL-E or ways of making known these kind of machine-human interfaces. So I'm wondering if you can just comment a little bit more on sort of the possibilities, like the creative possibilities and maybe the limitations of actually making things that we do experience in 2D, or maybe the 3D or 4D to 2D translation.
Yes, Myeong-Jun, you first.
그 제가 그 디자인에 대해서 그렇게 막 많이 가르치진 않지만 전 사실 그 디자인을 하면서 그런 어떤 공간감에 대해서 생각하는 걸 굉장히 중요하게 생각을 합니다.
So I'm not conducting studio-based course, but I always think about the scale or the experience or spatial experience of the space very importantly.
그것이 그래서 디자인을 진행을 할 때 특히 그런 디지털에서도 마찬가지, 디지털 레프레젠테이션에서도 마찬가지고 그런 우리가 모델링, 실제로 모델링하는 것이 굉장히 중요하다고 생각을 하는데 그때 이제 가장 중요하게 생각하는 게 저는 그런 어떤 휴먼 피규어가 굉장히 중요하다고 생각을 합니다.
When we are using digital kind of technology to model things, I always think about the human figure as the most important kind of design tool to the studio.
그 휴먼 피규어를 그 미디엄으로 해서 학생들이나 사람들은 그 경관, 그러니까 디자인될 그 경관에 대해서 상상할 수 있기 때문에 그것이 중요하다.
So when you put human figure as a medium, it really gives opportunity to people to think about how the landscape is viewed or being experienced.
So actually, I see the use of the digital. We actually call it a beings, like there is a life. And there was a time when Midjourney was quite popular in a way. We use it quite often, but not to create image, but to have conversation with it, because we see it as another brain. It's like Japanese haiku. We talk one line and then it will respond to us. Yeah. So there is a spark of ideas that can be also ongoing. Yeah. So that is to us what is the use of digital.
Sorry, it's a simple question, but I'm interested in how you might sort of delve into it more. The relationship you have with plants, especially Yuhan and Chisa Toda, the relationship you have with plants in relationship to, you talk about a different relationship between culture and nature and artifice and non-artifice, and I'm just interested in if you could talk about your relationship with plants and how you position that or not.
Relationship with plants. Well, we do have a lot. Actually, even in Japan, like it's not tropical region. We do have a lot of plants. So we do like work a lot with plants. However, plants itself, it grows, right? So like I've showed 2 projects. Like YKK, we did the saplings, but like other ones, we put the larger trees. So it's a question is about what species you're going to put, and also what's the question is what size you're going to put. So you do have to think about what project, which size, and which species you have to put. Of course, it's about where and everything, but like how do you want it to grow, and like how length? How you think? Like last project, like Orakadan Fuji, that's like a resort hotel. It has to be like mature when you open it, right? But like still, we had a larger trees, but I made them to grow a little bit. Like I didn't put the largest I can, but like because it has to make a relationship in, like the trees together have to make a relationship. It's not us making a relationship. We do predict how it works, but at last, they do have to. There's some, like in YKK, some trees were gone, actually. I didn't talk about it this time, but like we're doing another area in that symbol zone. We learned a lot about plants, what's gonna survive in that area. So on another places, we like elaborated the species that we first planted, and then planted another one. So it's still going thing, I guess. We don't have any answer, or like it's not like this time success or anything. It's like I have to keep changing.
So I think that answer really also speaks about your notion of sustainability being education, right? This whole procedure of failing and the success, learning from the which tree survives and which tree did not. May I ask one question to you related to this question about the trees and all? As a Malaysia-born landscape architect who is practicing in Singapore, both countries are in the same bioregion of very tropical climate. But then how Singapore has been really benchmarking its country through the green country, green nation, is by really controlling the greenery of such tropical condition, right? But I'm not sure if this is still true or not, but I learned it one time that Singapore government even label each individual tree of the country, and they know exactly how that tree is extreme and exactly how many numbers of trees are living at one moment of Singapore. So that level of control, I was just amazed by and also terrified by. Even that was possible in such tropical country. So wonder how the transition, born in Malaysia, and really the one as respecting the relationship between everything, practicing in Singapore. How was it? Was there any cultural shock or anything that you had to adapt?
Okay, I think I will answer Christine's question first. Because to me, the relationship with plants is about sharing. So there is a term that I quite like, which is if nothing is eating your plants, then you are actually not doing a garden. So, So as a landscape architect practice, we have faced a lot of clients who say that maybe I want butterflies, but I don't want flowers in my garden, or like I want butterflies, but I don't want caterpillars. So to me, plants is about sharing relationship, also with people and with animals. And to your questions, I think Singapore now is they no longer call themselves as a city in garden, but a city in nature. Yeah, actually most of the plants in Singapore came from Malaysia. So yeah, so actually there isn't any culture shock, but in fact Malaysia is more manicured than Singapore in terms of urban landscape. Because if you go to Malaysia, you can see like almost like topiary shape, because that is the easiest to maintain. Yeah, Kuala Lumpur or any town in Malaysia, there is not as well as Singapore. In fact, yeah, because the maintenance is much easier if you just use your cutter to cut out the shape. Yeah, but in Singapore, I think the government is trying to push rewilding. So there will be more than one species. They are trying to push out more in compositions. And from aesthetic, in terms of look, maybe since 50 years ago until now, they have changed their vision into how to share the landscape. Yeah.
Interesting. What about Malaysia? Is there any the policy about change in terms of the level of controlling the aesthetics of the tropical landscape?
I don't think Malaysia has this control of aesthetic, but then recently, because we are working on the park projects, and then they sent us a list that governments has been objecting. And that is a culture shock to me, because I've been working in Singapore and we are quite free to propose plants. So for example, in Malaysia, we can't plant there's a palm with, on the bodies, on the trunk, there are a lot of spines or thorns, or the fruits maybe is poisonous and we can't plant, but in Singapore we are allowed. So to me, that is a culture shock. Yeah, so Singapore is actually wilder than Malaysia.
Any other question? I think we can finish a bit earlier, and then we can transit to session 4 later. Thank you very much. Thank you.